On today's show, we'll talk weathering the schedule and how I think I've got a plan for how Denver can get some rest for guys in the right spots. We'll talk about how to expand MPJ's game and get the most out of the season from him, plus some final thoughts on Jamal Murray's extension. All that and more on Locked On Nuggets.
You are Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome to Locked On Nuggets, your daily Denver Nuggets podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Thanks for joining us and making us part of your day. Appreciate you guys listening to us here on a Thursday. You should have another show from Swipo later this afternoon, whatever's going on in his brain, but I'm with you right now. My name is Matt Moore. I'm a senior NBA writer for the Action Network. Glad to be with you here on a Thursday if you're listening on the podcast. Wednesday night, if you're catching us at youtube.com/Locked On Nuggets. I do want to let you know that I've had a lot of coughing today as I continue to recover from pneumonia and COVID. Yes, it's been a month. Yes, I'm still sick. So if my voice gives out, I apologize. I'll do the best I can to get through it. Want to let you know today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's get to it. On today's show, final segment, I'll give you some final thoughts on Jamal Murray's extension as he signed the deal today at the Nuggets offices or somewhere with wearing a hoodie, which is pretty cool. You get to be like, just hanging out, wearing a hoodie, signing a deal for $208 million guaranteed. It's a pretty good life. We'll talk about MPJ because I saw some graphics today Swipa shared that I kind of wanted to comment on about how to get the most out of MPJ maybe this season for a number of reasons and what that kind of looks like. But we'll start today. I want to talk about the schedule a little bit. So one of the things that I looked at, decided to kind of go poking around today was I pulled up the Nuggets win-loss record. At Basketball Reference, you can actually see like their margin of victory, these little bar graphs, right? So I took that and I overlaid it over Jokic's EPM. And I want to kind of just see like how much does it match up to when Joker had a great game, the Nuggets won. Spoiler alert, it's pretty high. But even when he had great games and they lost, like he still had awesome games when they would lose because that's how it goes sometimes. But what I was actually kind of noticing was there's a trend line you can kind of look at over at dunksandthrees.com that shows you his 5-game moving average of a metric I like called EPM. And it's not it. I'm not trying to use it to be like he was better or worse than given this. He wasn't as good as you think. It's more of like what I like about it is you get to track like, okay, did this guy dominate the whole year? Was he pretty steady? Did he dip? When did he dip? And then how much did he recover? And with Yoke, obviously because he's the most impactful and best player in the league, it's always going to be pretty high. And his standard is way above everybody else's. But one thing I did notice was December and January is really where he started to dip. Was that was where his impact on the game became a little bit less. And if you kind of think back to how the team was playing, they had an insane early schedule. Not from an opponent standpoint, because that's how we judge these things. And it's a really bad way to judge the regular season. It doesn't matter who you play. It matters how many games are you playing, in what span of time, and how much do you have to travel. Though that's what determines how hard an NBA regular season game is. No kidding. Like, in terms of what it takes out of you over a span of games. Okay. And so the Nuggets had a front loaded schedule last year where they had a ton of games. They had the most games in the league before Thanksgiving. And they knew that. And one of their plans was we're going to go and we're going to burst out of the gate and we're going to push through this hard part. Like Malone talked about it. Like we're going to push through this adversity and this hard part because when we come out on the other side and the schedule gets easier, we'll be in a good position record wise. But the problem, as we've stated multiple times, is that the Wolves and the Thunder, and to a degree the Clippers later on, were so good that after the Nuggets pushed, they just had to keep pushing. And so there wasn't that kind of like give back on the schedule because it was like, all right, you pushed through the hard part of your schedule and you didn't gain any ground because the other teams were so good. And I say this to kind of mention that you can kind of track when you look at these charts how Yoke kind of got tired in the middle bit. And I don't even know if tired is, I think mentally drained is probably a better word for it. Because like I would come on the show and talk about how unhappy Joker was in post-game interviews. And like, it's just pretty obvious that Joker's just like, I'm in the, it's game 4, it's game 35. I've had this interview 1,700 times. You guys have asked me the same questions. I've done this a million times. I've played the same team in the same building, and like it gets boring. It's just like another game. It's a job, right? And I think that's really where things start to dip a little bit. Not in terms of Joker's performance. I think you can kind of correlate it with the team, right? Is that Joker is probably not going to do well if the rest of the team is struggling too. He'll have great nights individually, but his impact won't be as high. And I bring all this up to mention kind of if we look ahead to 2024-25, we do have a different kind of look at the schedule, which as I looked at it, the Nuggets are tied for the fewest games before Thanksgiving. They have a really spread out, light schedule to start. There's some travel, but it's not necessarily a condensed, really hectic schedule to start out with. They are tied for the most games in December and in January individually. Those 2 months, they are tied for the most games in the league. So they start really slowly, and then they have a condensed schedule in December and January. And the biggest reason I kind of bring this up is there's a lot of reason for them. My least favorite question from any reporter before a game is, how important is it to get off to a good start? It makes me irrationally angry. Literally no coach in the history of professional sports has ever been like, we want to spot them 10. No one has ever been like, we want to start off terribly and dig our way out of it. Ever. It is the dumbest question imaginable. And like it's geared to kind of be like, how important is urgency? That's what you're actually asking. How much urgency do you need to play with from the jump? But the answer is always kind of yeah. And if you don't have it, it's just because that thing's kind of ephemeral and hard to generate sometimes. I say all this to say that in the beginning of the season, you always want to start off well. Nobody's ever like, we really want to be 2-10 and then try and dig our way out of it. But I do think if you look at the schedule, the Nuggets have an opportunity here. They have tough opponents to start off with, but they have light travel schedule and a lot of days in between for them to be able to rack up wins. And if they can do that, if they can get off to the kind of start that they have the last 2 seasons, then when the schedule hits in December and January, that in particular is when you need to see Nikola Jokic, Jamal Murray, Aaron Gordon, maybe Michael Porter Jr. taking games off. They need to build in rest days in December and January, not in March, not in February. By then, it's too late. Like you're just trying to survive by then. Get them time if they need it in December and January, but you need to build in time, or you can build in time if they need it in March and April, but you need to build in time in December and January specifically because I think of the mental strain that is on those guys and because of the density of the schedule. I did look this up. The last 2 seasons, when Jamal Murray misses a game and then comes back in the regular season, the Denver Nuggets are 12-5. That's a 70% win rate. I would love to look at Nikola Jokic's rate on these. They were 3-0 last season after Joker missed a game, but he only missed 3 freaking games. So like this is kind of the thing is you need to build in more games for Joker to sit. You need to build it. And I've been on this. There's this idea that Jamal needs to play a lot of games this season. Nope. Like do not, you can condition, right? I'm okay if you want to take the approach that conditioning is an issue with him. I'm not versed enough on his conditioning to know, but I'm okay if that's the approach you want to take. But game load doesn't need to be forced. If there's an opportunity for them to get him more time off, there's probably an opportunity there to get him some time. And I think it's really important. So the way that the schedule kind of looks is take advantage early, build a lead, rest, not constantly, just a little bit in December and January when things get really difficult. Now that's like a time for you to really show your best. So that's tough, but do that, get to All-Star, and they have basically a middle of the pack schedule density post All-Star. Like get to All-Star break. And then after that, pick your spots, get rest when you need it, manage the schedule. But that's going to be like the story of this season is you need to manage the NBA regular season. So that's where we're at. Up next, I've got some thoughts on Michael Porter Jr. I want to talk about. Swipe showed a chart on Twitter today that kind of got me thinking. And I want to talk a little bit about MPJ and where he's at. We'll talk about that up next here on Locked On Nuggets. Today's show is brought to you by Game Time. Game Time is absolutely phenomenal. They've got a new feature called Game Time Picks that makes getting tickets for your favorite live events even easier. Game Time Picks filters out the fluff to show you only incredible deals on great seats so you don't have to waste time searching through thousands of tickets. So a good example of this is if you're looking ahead to concert season, right? Or just, there's great concerts really through the fall in Denver at the various venues. If you're looking at those or tickets, right? If you want to go see a Broncos game and see Bo Nix, sorry. If you want to see that, then what you do is all you gotta do is go to Game Time and open up the Game Time pick section, and they'll show you all these great deals. You'll probably get really great deals on the Broncos for some reason. So you'll be able to get a lot of those kind of opportunities. They've got panoramic view from your seat, so you know what you're going to get before you buy. You can toggle on their all-in pricing. If you push that button, you're going to make sure that you're not getting caught off guard by any of the fees. They've got the best in-ticket coverage. Your purchase is covered with the most flexible customer service policy in the ticketing industry. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, and use code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account and redeem code LOCKEDONNBA for $20 off. Download Game Time today. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Back here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us and making this part of your day. Five-ish said, your co-host said, Swipe us told us not to listen to a word you say because of football season. I don't know. I think I know what good football is. I watch it a lot, so I don't know what to tell you there. Also, I will say this. You should check out Locked On Broncos because these kind of seasons are actually really interesting and like you're building the foundation of something. So go check out Locked On Broncos. You can catch that wherever you get podcasts. Okay. Oh man, I'm getting the 1-star reviews again. Adam gets very mad when you guys do that. Please do not do that. Come on. There's one dig because Five-ish said something. All right. Anyway, let's talk a little bit about MPJ. So Swipe shared a chart today that he was just quote tweeted a chart about the most efficient scorers from various spots. And MPJ pops up on a left side baseline jumper and above the free throw line, mid-range jumper. And that's on top of him being obviously an elite shooter from 3-point range, although he did dip to 39% below 40% this season. I'm doing my top 100, and MPJ takes quite a bit of a dip from where he was last year. Now, that's not surprising. The guys on title teams are always going to be ranked really high because they just contributed to a title. And so he was really high. And it's interesting because, I don't think that Mike had a bad season last year. And I don't think that Mike, I don't put as much stock into the playoff struggles as other people do. He had a bad series versus the Wolves. He would have had a good series versus the Mavericks. I don't put too much stock in it. But what I do think is kind of interesting is because there's so much now pressure as the second apron, letting KCP go, the offseason, the roster construction talks continue. MPJ is getting a little bit more pressure circled around him as hey, you could really do with not having that contract on the roster. It would give you more flexibility, despite the fact that Mike's contributed to a championship and played a very pivotal role in those series. And he's also, by the way, lights out killer versus the Lakers every time they play him, which seems like a lot. With MPJ, one of the things I think is interesting, though, is his mid-range efficiency, is that he really is a killer jump shooter. And even though I think sometimes he gets way too enamored with the sidestep fadeaway rather than just rising and firing clean, one thing I do think that's probably good, and we've been talking about this forever, I'm kind of off of the idea of giving MPJ more opportunities with the ball. His handle and driving ability with the ball hasn't necessarily made the leap, in part because I don't think he's gotten the reps for him to be able to do it. And the Nuggets have managed to optimize MPJ for what they need, not optimizing him, but optimizing the MPJ they need while protecting him physically. And that's good. But if we look at the idea of, hey, the Nuggets lost a quality 3-point shooter who was also really good coming off of DHOs and hitting a mid-range pull-up and who understood the offense. They've lost that guy and they've lost Bruce Brown. It does make a little bit of sense for the idea of there needs to be a little bit of expansion of MPJ's opportunities, less from a give MPJ the ball and let him cook standpoint, and more from there has got to be ways to generate actions that put him in a position to either have a mismatch or have him have an opportunity to get a clean look, not just on spot up threes. I don't think that MPJ is nothing more than a spot up shooter. And here's a weird comp because he's so much bigger. Duncan Robinson last year had one of the most surprising seasons for me of last season, because when I thought of Duncan, I was like, incredible shooter, just phenomenal, great shooter. And that's what he was just like a shooter. He was just a guy that played next to Jimmy and Bam and Tyler and spotted up and shot threes. But last season, Duncan was so much more of a 3-level player in that he wasn't like isocentric Duncan Robinson ball, but he would off of screens catch, relocate, make passes, really distribute. He was a playmaker on the move, which is a very underrated skill in the NBA. And he found a lot of different ways to be part of the offense. Robinson was great for them last year for a really mediocre offense that needed every single point that he generated. And playing a little bit more like that, I think, is a way to get MPJ a little bit more involved. Now, I'm not saying he's not going to be the fastest guy, right? So it's a little bit harder to just run him off of screens. But because of his size, you do have the ability to take advantage of switch mismatches and then have him take advantage of those. One thing I've wanted to see forever is just him at a triple threat, which is, post up, face up, the old mellow, right? You can drive, you can drive, you can pass, or you can jab step 1,700 times and then shoot. And I think that there's probably value in getting MPJ like more. I still believe that he can probably do that, even if the driving stuff isn't as good as it used to be. I think there's probably like a little bit of an opportunity there to kind of expand MPJ's game because he's so efficient from every single spot on the floor. And that's really valuable. And I think the Nuggets probably need to be like, look, the contract's not great, but he's an absolutely phenomenal offensive player. How do we get more out of him to compensate for what we've lost, rather than just trying to replace KCP, Bruce Brown, etc., with Russ and Christian Brown and Peyton Watson? Oso Blanco says, what if the offense is better with CB than KCP? That's my wild take. Too much standing and a bit stale end of last year. More athleticism and cutting. That's great if you have direction and purpose and timing. I have questions about all of those things when it comes to this offense. But if I'm wrong, then yeah, there's a possibility that it works out. I'm never going to be like, that's never going to happen, because these things can absolutely work. And like, CB's a really smart player. Like, Christian's really smart. It's why he's won at every single level. You don't earn the minutes that he has if you're not a smart player. Christian's really smart. He is audacious a lot of the time. And I do think that he's still working on understanding being ahead of reads, which is very difficult, but he's working on it. And that could absolutely kind of, I think, help some things. But I still think that maybe a better path of lifting the offensive ceiling for the Nuggets is by using MPJ a little bit better. On the other side, Jamal Murray signed his extension today. I'll give you my kind of final thoughts on Jamal's extension and what that means coming up for the Nuggets. We'll talk about that up next here on Locked On Nuggets. Passion, drive, and patience. The formula for winning championships is also what keeps your ride or die alive. eBay Motors has everything you need to maintain your vehicle and level it up to peak performance. Superchargers, roof racks, exhaust kits, LED headlights, and more. Whether you're into speed, power, or style, eBay Motors has you covered. With over 122 million parts for your number one ride or die, you'll always find exactly what you're looking for. And with eBay Guaranteed Fit, your parts guaranteed to fit your ride every time or your money back. With eBay Motors, you're burning rubber, not cash. With all the parts you need at the prices you want, it's easy to make your car the MVP and bring home huge wins. Keep your ride or die alive at ebaymotors.com. Eligible items only. Exclusions apply. eBay Guaranteed Fit only available to U.S. customers. We'll be right back on Locked On Nuggets. Final segment here on Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us on a Thursday. No World's Finest on Wednesday. Mahrez has had like an insane run of schedules of meetings and stuff over DNVR. We will be back to normal schedule, I think, next week. So be on the lookout for that. And also check us out on Sunday night. All right, let's talk about this. So today, the Nuggets officially announced Jamal Murray signing the extension, $208 million. The social team posted a photo of him signing and a video of him in a hoodie sign in the extension. Adam, and the DNVR has kind of talked about like this is gonna be Jamal's like finest season, like he's kind of pivoted that way. And I'll just say, I think it's difficult to kind of understand Jamal's season because, and like Mahrez has pointed out, his advanced metrics were the best of his career last year, and Jamal really did make jumps in his assists and passing. I don't ever want to be I'm never going to be a podcaster, an analyst, a writer, someone that covers the team that's going to be Pollyanna-ish. I'm never going to be like, well, no, actually it's a good thing. Everything's great. I think the Jamal deal is it's perilous because if Jamal doesn't ever make the jump that we've been honestly waiting on as people that cover the team and fans have been waiting on for 5 years, to go from really good player with some really good nights to all-star, then that's contract is going to be really prohibitive, and it's going to be seen as like a huge squandering of Jokic's time. But I do think it's important to note, I want to ask this question. Do you honestly, because the all-star thing is like such a conversation. Can't believe he's never played with an all-star. Can't believe Jokic has never played with an all-star. They won the title, right? And last year, they were in the Western Conference semifinals in a Game 7 up 20 at home. They win that. They face the Mavericks, who do not match up well with them. They likely make the finals, and they face a Celtics team that they've beaten twice. Now, that didn't happen, and that didn't happen for a number of reasons that we've litigated to death on this show. And we'll probably litigate a few more times before we get into the season. But it's important just to note here that like the Nuggets could have won the title last year. The Nuggets could win the title this year. Like the formula is good enough, because good enough is there are teams that are definitely just like not good enough. Okay. The Pacers, I loved last year, and I thought they were underrated by how people talked about them. But the Pacers were never winning the title. They were eventually going to got. They got past 2 teams because the circumstances fell their way. I like the matchup with the Bucks in particular, right? But they were never going to get past 4 squads. That was never going to happen for the Pacers. They're not good enough to beat 4 different teams in the playoff environment 4 out of 7 times. The Wolves, I think, actually kind of proved that they weren't that. Now, maybe if they face OKC, they get to the finals, right? But I'm not sure that they could have won the title because they were so limited once they ran into a team that they didn't match up well with. Once they weren't able to exert their advantages in the series, it got really dicey for Minnesota, right? The Clippers were never going to win a title. They just didn't have, they were not together enough. They weren't healthy enough, but they also just weren't together enough. They didn't have the guys. On and on and on. There's teams that were never going to win the title last year, right? The Knicks could have won the title. If everything had broken right, the Knicks could have won the title. But with the Nuggets, they definitely can win the title, and that puts them on the doorstep, and that is good enough. Like, that is good enough. And if you win, do you care if Jamal Murray's an all-star? Is it frustrating? Sure. It's because you want to feel good during the regular season, and you want to feel like Jokic is surrounded by great talent. But if he's got talent around him that's winning titles, I'm sorry, but no matter how much some people will act like it, it's not just Jokic. Jokic didn't single-handedly win the 2023 title. That team was awesome. That's one of the greatest teams that I've covered in the finals, and I've covered a lot of them. That team was elite. I'll put that team up against not the Warriors from like 2017, but I'll put that team up against a lot of squads, and I would feel comfortable in the Nuggets' chances. So if Murray was part of that team and you still have that core together, then what? Now, the problem with that is that you now have to work around Jokic's contract and Jamal's contract and try and figure out everything else, which is why the next big question is Aaron Gordon. And Ryan Blackburn over at Pickaxe and Roll is already starting to work on that and about how that's going to be a tricky, complicated question. And this is where we get into, should you go young and keep cheap contracts, or should you go, all these types of things. But I do think at the core of it is Jamal is going to be here, and Jamal is going to be part of this combination. And Jamal's career has never been linear. He was drafted with a lot of potential and a lot of hype and thought he was the baddest man on the planet. And then Jameer Nelson showed him what like a real point guard in the league looks like. And then he got the gig, and they moved out Jameer to make sure that he got the gig. And he honestly, early on, he did not. I will argue with anybody that it was like instantly with Jamal, because it wasn't. It took time for him to learn how to work with Yoke. Like the team had to learn that Yoke was the core, was the future, was the team. They had to learn that, and then they had to learn how to play together. And that took time. And then once it clicked, it got better and better and better. And now it's the best two-man game in the league. But Jamal's had that. He's had the injuries. He's had the awesome 2023 season. He's had this disaster. Like last year was good, not great. That's like a middle-ish, like a wavy line. And then obviously he had a bad summer. But I don't think you can sit here and just project that it's going to be bad. Contavia says, could have won the championship. Lol. Could have is just cope. The Nuggets have become worse and worse with Calvin Booth. Did you see Pickett? He's terrible. And Zeke, both terrible guys. Booth drafted. Okay. I'll just say this. There's a lot of conversation here about Jalen Pickett, who is a second rounder, and most second rounders never amount to anything. Okay, fair. Most second rounders don't amount to anything. This has always been one of my things with the draft problem, is trying to build through the draft. I think with the Nuggets position is very difficult because you're not getting good draft picks. It's why at the draft I was like, hey, if you're going to draft, you need to move up and get your guy. And they got moved up and they got their guy, and now he's out for the year. And that's how it goes sometimes. But I will just say that those guys are not going to determine what wins a championship. The Nuggets 8-man rotation is good enough to win the title. That's what matters. Who cares about Jalen Pickett and Zeke? I mean, I want good things for them because I want good things for everybody. And those guys might have great years. You never know. But Zeke Naji and Jalen Pickett do not matter to the Nuggets title chances the same way Jordan Walsh does not matter to the Boston Celtics title chances. Okay? The same way that Wendell Moore last season did not matter to the Minnesota Timberwolves title chances. You need 8 guys. The Nuggets have 8 guys. And that, I think, is really important. Zeke Naji is the 5th highest paid player. Yeah, I went off on that the other night. So if you want to catch an episode about that, you can catch that, because that just absolutely floored me. I can't believe Zeke is the 5th highest paid player. This is not true, though. Mayu says, if we didn't have Zeke Naji, we could have kept KCP. I don't know if that's true, man. I just don't know if that's accurate. I just really don't. I will tell you that there's like there is getting to be a conversation in the NBA media circles, like in the text messages and DMs that I have with other media folks, of us kind of like realizing it's been like a slow realization. Like we saw the new CBA and we're like, wow, they really put restrictions on spending, but we'd seen those before. And now we're kind of like, oh, they like built a hard cap. And that changes the conversation a little bit once we start to see how this has kind of played out. The other thing I would say is, again, there are a lot of twists and turns that happen with how NBA teams are built throughout the course of the season in terms of the rotation. I get it, because fans don't ever see that. They're like, we're just going to have our guys the whole year. There are a lot of guys that you just kind of add that become significant parts of your rotation by the end of the year. And I think that's going to happen here. I think that there's a likelihood that an impact player for the Nuggets, that one of the 8 guys for the playoffs, isn't on the roster. I think it's entirely possible. And we'll see how that goes about in trying to develop it. I'm not going to sit here and say that Calvin Booth has had a great 2 off seasons. He hasn't. The team's gotten worse. If you want to say like the team's gotten worse back-to-back years, absolutely accurate. I think the team's gotten worse in back-to-back seasons. What I will push back on is the fatalism of just being like, and so it's over. No, okay, chill out. They were in Game 7 of the Western Conference semifinals, up 20 in the 4th. Be cool. Like, there's a middle ground to be found here of the Nuggets have gotten worse. The Nuggets can still win a championship. They need to find ways to get better. And that's what they're trying to do right now. And that's the battle that's going on, is trying to figure out how to get better. And that's going to be an ongoing process. That's going to do it for today's Locked On Nuggets. Thanks for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. Swipe will be with you later with a show I will try and get to you guys on Friday as well with some news. We'll look at the Western Conference. I got some thoughts on some other teams and how the Nuggets match up with them. Let me know what you guys want to hear us talk about as we try and get through these last 3 weeks before NBA training camp. Thanks very much for joining us. Appreciate you guys being with us. Make sure to subscribe and hit the like button over at youtube.com/LockedOnNuggets. We'll talk to you guys again soon. Have a great day. We'll see you next time on Locked On Nuggets.